This title was recognized officially at a synod held in London on September 6, 1918, but with the addition of the words Old Catholic. A complete edition of the new rite was published on St. Albans Day, June 21st of that same year. But over in North America, there had been a double opposition to what Wedgwood and Leadbeater were planning. From her headquarters at Point Loma, California, a high priestess of the cult, Mrs. Catherine Tingley, had continued to denounce the Old Catholic infiltration into Theosophy. Every issue of Divine Life published in Chicago under the auspices of Mrs. Tingley's bitter rival, Mrs. Celestia Root Lang, contained violent attacks of Madame Blavatsky's society as being sold into Catholic bondage. Father Hampton replied with a pamphlet entitled The Occultism of the Mass and the Old Catholic Movement, which appeared at Cotrona, California in 1918. Returning to Australia, Bishop Wedgwood used the revised version of the Roman Pontifical for the first time on July 13, 1919, when, with the assistance of Leadbeater, he consecrated Irving Steiger Cooper as Legionary Bishop for the USA. The ever-increasing numbers of seekers after truth were informed that the liberal Catholic Church exists to forward the work of her Master Christ in the world and to feed his flock. The Church draws the central inspiration of its work from an intense faith in the living Christ, believing that the vitality of a church gains in proportion as its members cease to think only of a Christ who lived 2,000 years ago, and strive rather to serve as a vehicle for the eternal Christ, who lives as a mighty spiritual presence in the world, guiding and sustaining his peoples. Lo, I am with you always, even unto the consummation of the age. Before Abraham was, I am. Theosophists have not always been in agreement about the historic Christ. Mrs. Besant appears to have held the opinion that there was both an historical and a mystical Jesus. The former, so she wrote in one of her books, was born in 105 BC, became an Essene monk, studied Indian occultism, traveled in Egypt, and at the age of 29 gave up his body to be a Buddha of compassion, and who entered into the mystical body at baptism. The man Jesus suffered in his body for the services rendered for it as the temporary home of the Lord Maitreya. From this story grew up the belief of the mystical Christ in the Logos, crucified, that is, extended throughout matter, and also the divine spark in man. All this, so she maintained, was revealed to her on the astral plane. Wedgwood and Leadbeater laid stress on the fact of the liberal Catholic Church being an independent and self-governing body, neither Roman Catholic nor Protestant, but Catholic. This church aims at combining the traditional sacramental form of Catholic worship with its ritual, its deep mysticism, and its abiding witness to the reality of sacramental grace, with the widest measure of intellectual liberty and respect for the individual conscience. Here was none of the supposed hidebound rigidity of Romanism. Liberal Catholics were permitted absolute freedom of interpretation of the scriptures, the creeds, and the liturgy. Regarding the mind as one of the great avenues to spiritual apprehension, it encourages among its adherents the freest play of scientific or philosophical thought. Another feature of this all-embracing, comprehensive new church was its welcome to its altars of all who reverently approached them, creating no barriers in the nature of standards of dogmatic belief. Persons of any religion or none could receive communion at Mass if they felt the urge. No priest had the right to refuse them. The broad-mindedness of liberal Catholicism was shown by the statement that it had no wish to proselytize in an aggressive sense from among the adherents of any other church, and as an earnest of this, welcomed people to regular and full participation in its services without asking or expecting them to leave their original church. Before all else, it was a modernist church in the sense that it maintained that the form of religion should keep pace with human growth and enlightenment. Historic in that it holds that the church has handed down a very precious heritage from the Christ himself. Some years before the liberal Catholic credo was formulated, and about 18 months before his death, Archbishop Matthew wrote to Canon Ferrer on June 4, 1918, deploring what he called Wedgwood's duplicity, and said, "He distinctly gave me to understand that he was an Orthodox Catholic in belief, that it was not necessary for any Theosophist to agree with Mrs. Besant who was a Hindu, and that in fact he did not agree with her, excepting on the three objects of the Theosophical Society, which are so worded as to appear harmless. The cloven hoof only appeared when I required an explicit repudiation of heresies, which any bishop in authority has a right and indeed an obligation to do in such cases. I do not understand any of you, and deplore the fact that you ever invaded my movement and played havoc with it. No doubt our Lord will take care of his own and of his own work, and I leave you all in his divine hands. After Matthew's death on December 20th, 1919, the liberal Catholic Church gained more and more adherents in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and Canada. A Theosophical Congress took place at Erwald in the Tyrol in the summer of 1923. The Order of the Star in the East had already been presented by Baron von Pallandt, a wealthy Dutch theosophist, with Castle Erd near Arnhem. During the next few years, several gatherings of the liberal Catholic Church were held in this moated medieval castle hidden in the midst of a pine forest. On March 9, 1924, Bishop Leadbeater, assisted by Bishops Mazel and Cooper, consecrated at Sydney Frank Waters Piggott as Regionary Bishop for Great Britain and Ireland. Like his consecrator, the new prelate had formerly been a priest of the Church of England. The second edition of the liberal Catholic liturgy was published on the Feast of the Epiphany 1924 and bore the imprimatur Charles Webster Leadbeater, presiding bishop. It appeared simultaneously at London, Los Angeles, and Sydney. A third edition appeared in 1942 with the imprimatur of Bishop F. W. Piggott. Leadbeater stated in the preface that this new rite had been composed by Bishop Wedgwood, to whose wide erudition and indefatigable labors the liberal Catholic Church owes a debt of the deepest gratitude. The Roman Rite of 1570 was chosen as the basis for the celebration of the Holy Eucharist, commonly called the Mass, although some details were taken from the liturgy of the Catholic Apostolic Irvingite Church. But all expressions involving fear of God, of his wrath, and the prospects of an everlasting hell were removed. Also those expressive of servile cringing and self-abasement, abject appeals for mercy, even culminating in naive attempts to bargain with the Almighty. The new liturgy contained no crude anthropomorphism. Every trace of the jealous, angry, bloodthirsty Jehovah of Ezra, Nehemiah, and the others, a God who needs propitiating and to whose mercy constant appeals must be made, had been deleted. Bishop Wedgwood explained that the knowledge of Eastern religions and of the faiths of ancient Egypt and Babylon that has increasingly become available in our times has entirely dispelled the illusion that the Jews had any monopoly of divine truth, and proportionately lessens the value of the Old Testament as an integral basis of the Christian faith. In the Gloria in Excelsis, the phrase Lamb of God was eliminated with the explanation that such zoological characterization of our Lord does not impress the virgin mind with anything but a sense of the ridiculous. This phrase, however, was retained in the canon of the Mass because of its symbolical meaning. This liturgical vademecum provided not only a vernacular adaptation of the Roman Mass suitable for the modern mind, but also abbreviated forms of Prime, Vespers, and Compline. Benediction of the Most Holy Sacrament featured a long litany with 22 four-line verses, besides other non-Roman interpolations. The rites for baptism, confirmation, confession, matrimony, holy unction, and the burial of the dead could hardly have been more elaborate. The liberal Catholic Church retained the four minor orders of the Latin Church, and the ritual for conferring them, as well as those for the ordination of subdeacons, deacons, and priests, not to mention the consecration of bishops, contained most of the traditional Western ceremonial. Blessings were provided for many objects, including holy oils, and the consecration of a church. Taking a hint from the simplification of the Benedictine calendar, the number of saints' days to be observed was reduced to a bare minimum, for as it was explained, the whole system of such commemorations is an anachronism which might be allowed for the most part to drop its abeyance without impairing our belief in the communion of saints. The Roman calendar is overladen with saints, of whom few excite any real devotion at this distance of time, while others undoubtedly are mythical or transform pagan deities. It is worth mentioning, however, that Bishops Wedgwood and Leadbeater anticipated Pope John XXIII by by 36 years by changing the octave of the Epiphany to the baptism of our Lord. Another interesting feature is that the dialogue Mass was officially approved by the liberal Catholic Church 34 years before the Sacred Congregation of Rites issued an instruction of universal application on September 3, 1958, which was approved speciale modo by Pius XII shortly before his death. In his preface to the liturgy, Bishop Wedgwood writes, "With the spread of education, the growth of intelligence, and the advantage of a vernacular liturgy, there is no reason at all why the laity should assist at the Holy Eucharist in the capacity of spectators only, or be debarred from following step by step what is taking place at the altar. Liturgy means public work or service, not merely in the sense of work done by the public, but also work for, on behalf of the public at large." In a sense, the ethos of the liberal Catholic Church was in keeping with the spirit of the 20s when it reached the peak of its popularity, just another manifestation of the exotic attitude towards life which produced what Osbert Lancaster has called Curzon Street Baroque. Hence its appeal to the more mystical-minded, bright young things of the 1920s who got fed up with dancing the Charleston and sought something more satisfying to the soul. The liberal Catholic Church could claim with some justice that it had taken root in 4 continents. Already ensconced in Europe and America, the 2 chief spiritual centers of the cult were in India and Australia. At the headquarters of the Theosophical Society at Adyar near Madras, Mrs. Annie Besant expounded the mysteries to pilgrims from all countries who could afford to make the journey to sit at her feet. Born in 1847, this now white-haired old lady, who had married an Anglican clergyman, the Reverend Frank Besant, in 1867, from whom she separated 6 years later, becoming an agnostic secularist and propagandist for contraception, working with Charles Bradlaugh, was still a powerful personality, wielding a worldwide influence. Her numerous disciples regarded her as a saint. At Sydney, New South Wales, the venerable, tall, leonine, long, white-bearded Bishop Leadbeater ruled like a patriarch over a community of more than 50 persons, of both sexes and many nationalities. Most of them were girls and boys between the ages of 9 and 25. They were housed, not too comfortably, so it is related, in a big house known as the Manor, situated at Mossman, a suburb of Sydney on the north side of the harbour. The majority of the young men and youths in the community had been ordained as doorkeepers, readers, exorcists, acolytes, subdeacons, deacons, and even priests. One of the most important members of this strange confraternity was the bishop's huge tortoiseshell cat, said to be in his last incarnation in the animal kingdom. Leadbeater, usually robed in a Roman purple cassock and cape, occupied a room lined from floor to ceiling with copper, beaten into weird and hideous shapes. He maintained that copper conserves magnetism and that it is helpful for getting into touch with the masters on the astral plane. In the autumn of 1924, a very distinguished member of the liberal Catholic Church, Lady Emily Lutyens, obtained her husband's consent to make the 10,296 miles voyage from London Tilbury docks to Sydney so that she and 2 of her daughters could benefit by the personal spiritual direction of Bishop Leadbeater. They broke their pilgrimage in India so that they could visit Mrs. Besant at Adyar and reach Sydney in the early spring of 1925. Both Betty and Mary Lutyens were validly rebaptized and confirmed within 2 days of their arrival. The former was also initiated as a co-mason, said to be a channel of access to the masters, but for some reason or other this privilege was denied to her sister. We are told that every morning before breakfast Bishop Leadbeater descended from his copper-lined room to a basement chapel where he celebrated Mass. On Sundays, the whole community crossed the harbour to Sydney for morning and evening services in St. Albans Liberal Catholic Church. Very often the service of healing, a feature of the official liturgy, was carried out on Sunday afternoon with the prescribed anointing with consecrated oils and the laying on of hands. Mary Lutyens tells us that the patriarchal prelate insisted on regular attendance at Sunday worship and used to explain to his spiritual children that if they could see the wonderful force going up in glowing colors through the church roof and spreading over the whole city, they would realize the importance of this communal worship. The boys and girls were reprimanded by him when the emanations through the roof were not sufficiently strong or beautifully colored. The occult meaning of colors held a special place in liberal Catholic worship, including the Roman color sequence of the vestments worn. The faithful were told that violet, lying at the opposite end of the spectrum to red, produces vibrations which are cleansing, actinic, and piercing. The color green holds the balance in the middle of the spectrum, and its vibrations help to produce sympathy and general goodwill. Those who have time to peruse the 700 pages of Bishop Leadbeater's The Science of the Sacraments, 2nd edition, Adyar Madras 1929, will find the fullest possible information about his strange theories of symbolism, magnetism, and much else. This mighty tome is illustrated with 21 diagrams and 27 plates, some of them in color, and it is a complete exposition of and commentary on the worship of the liberal Catholic Church. It may surprise some priests to know that the value of a biretta is of the same character as that of a cork in a bottle, to prevent evaporation and consequent waste. Such forces may be aroused with the priest should be accommodated within him and be discharged for the benefit of his people, and not allowed to escape fruitlessly into higher planes, as is the natural tendency. Page 569. Bishops ought to know that the fanons of the mitre, which were originally merely strings to tie it in place, are now utilized to convey the force to the border of the cope or chasuble, and so out through these vestments to the people. Page 560. Abbots as well as bishops may not be aware that a pectoral cross acts as a prism for the forces which are always flowing through these major prelates. Page 573. The Liturgical Commission, if not the Sacred Congregation of Rites, will be glad to know about the mysterious forces that interplay in the host and chalice after consecration, the powerful magnetism of holy water, and all the rays and sub-rays, including the seventh ray, just now coming into operation. Were he alive today, he would recognize an affinity between the new Catholic Cathedral at Liverpool and the colored frontispiece of his Science in the Sacraments, and promise that when it is completed, the forces and vibrations within this phallic-shaped building will be far more powerful than those in the Gothic Revival Anglican Cathedral in the same city, quite apart from the clergy of the former having a valid apostolic succession. All sorts of strange things happened when Lady Emily and her two daughters were members at Leadbeater's mixed confraternity. One day the bishop told her that the masters had revealed to him that she was to propagate a new form of Mariolatry, and that he would get in touch on the astral with Mahachohan, Buddha's favorite disciple, and find out if he approved. Lady Emily was advised to consult the Lord Maitreya, and the following morning she awoke with the certainty that he meant her to be a sort of theosophist Saint Louis Mary Grignon de Montfort, and promote true devotion of Our Blessed Lady by founding a World League of Motherhood. After these more awe-inspiring spiritual experiences, Lady Emily returned to Europe in June 1925, leaving her two daughters in Australia for the benefit of further mystical intimations by Leadbeater, but the bishop insisted that they must be presented at court the following year, because this would help to spread the master's word in society. An international theosophical conference took place in Holland in August 1925. The program included the consecration of George Sidney Arundel as Legionary Bishop for India. Lady Emily, who was among the delegates, relates that up to the eve of the consecration, no reply had been received from Leadbeater to the letter requesting him to confirm the election. So Arundel got through to Australia on the astral and was able to assure Bishop Wedgwood that everything was in order. The following morning, August 4th, assisted by Bishops Mazel and Piggott, Wedgwood raised Arundel to the episcopate. On returning from the church, there was a cable from Leadbeater, couched in very disapproving forms. Lady Emily recalls that it struck her that Mrs. Besant looked very grave when she read it. This suggests that reception on the astral was subject to hazards, but the congregation were told that the Lord Maitreya and all the other masters had been present at the consecration, invisible, of course, to mortal eyes. The previous day, Bishop Wedgwood had distributed to the faithful crosses and swastikas, which he had highly magnetized. The astral vibrations at this castle in Holland appear to have been as powerful as those which Leadbeater had experienced in a village church in Sicily, about which he wrote at great length in The Hidden Side of Things, 1913, relating how he first discovered what he called the magic of the Mass. The masters, who at that time were understood to be hidden in a remote spot in Hungary, were gracious enough to put over the air some very helpful messages. For instance, the Lord Maitreya gave detailed rules on episcopal and sacerdotal fashions in clothing, and minute details of ritual and ceremonial. He laid down that henceforth silk underwear would be obligatory for clerics. Capes and carefully designed crimson gowns would have to form part of the trousseau of those in major orders. Hats were not permitted. Frank W. Piggott, Legionary Bishop for Great Britain and Ireland, confided to Lady Emily that it would be difficult for him to obey these sartorial regulations, because he was not so rich as some of his episcopal brethren. Then, to add to the austerity of their rule of life, the bishops and the initiates were forbidden by the masters to eat eggs, or any food containing eggs. As it was, most theosophists were strict vegetarians, and some were even teetotalers. On the evening of March 9, 1925, there was an open-air procession of the host, enclosed in a monstrance, around the chapel of the castle. The congregation wore their highly magnetized crosses and swastikas so that they could feel the astral vibrations radiating from them. Lady Emily tells us that Wedgwood had a vision of her being consecrated as a sort of abbess. The following day, Arundel brought through the names of 12 apostles whom the Lord had chosen to walk with him when he comes. It must have been encouraging to be told that the two bishops present were direct pupils of Makachohan. What's more, Arundel had been selected as the chief staff of the seventh race, and he was now in his final incarnation. Henceforth, he would be moved around the universe and not attached to any planet. A new subrace would develop in California. Mrs. Besant had an inspiring revelation that Wedgwood would be the Mahachohan of the seventh root race, and she was the Manu and Leadbeater the Bodhisattva. Such was the situation in which Matthew's ancient Catholic Church of Great Britain and Ireland found itself after 10 years. Shortly after this theosophical reunion in the Netherlands, Bishops Arundel and Wedgwood made a pilgrimage to Rome, where they appeared in the streets in Roman purple cassocks, displaying large pectoral crosses. Both prelates continued to have psychic revelations, often when saying Mass. Unfortunately, however, their visions of the future did not always agree, either because their respective masters did not see eye to eye, or because of interference on the astral. On May 23, 1926, Leadbeater raised to the episcopate John Moynihan Tettemer, who the following year was appointed suffragan bishop for the USA. Tettemer, born at St. Louis, Missouri in 1876, had been a Passionist priest, and had risen in 1914 to be consultor general of his congregation. Then he fell ill, and while recuperating at Davos, lost his faith completely. Eventually, he joined the Liberal Catholic Church and resumed his priestly duties. He spent the last 15 years of his life at Beverly Hills, California, where he married and had 3 children. The bishop played the part of a priest in several films, including Meet John Doe and Lost Horizon. He died in 1949. There is sufficient evidence that Krishnamurti, otherwise Alcyon, who was still being exhibited as the new Messiah, had as little sympathy with liberal Catholicism and co-Masonry as with anything else that went with his cultus. On the other hand, thanks to Miss Mary Dodge, whom Lady Emily Lutyens had converted to Theosophy, he and his brother benefited from an income settled on them for life. So these 2 young Indians had no financial worries, and Mary Lutyens recalls that their slim figures were always exquisitely dressed. They went to the best bootmakers, tailors, and shirt makers. Their neat brown shoes were always so beautifully polished, and their straight black hair, which was parted in the middle and smelt of some delicious unguent they both used, so sleek. As time went on, Krishna grew more and more weary of all this play acting, and of being dragged around the world as the forthcoming reincarnation of the Lord Maitreya. In 1929, he had the courage to dissolve the Order of the Star in the East, and retired into private life. This was a stunning blow to innumerable theosophists. Most liberal Catholics felt exactly as the early Christians would have felt if they had discovered that Jesus was merely a myth. Lady Emily was among those whose faith was shattered, but the liberal Catholic Church, having recovered from the shock, managed to readjust itself to a new situation. In 1934, Piggott was elected presiding bishop in succession to Leadbeater, who had died that same year at the age of 87, having spent the last 21 years in Australia. During the past 30 years, the liberal Catholic Church has stressed that although many of its past members have been members of the Theosophical Society, the Church itself has never had any sort of administrative or official connection with the Society, nor has there ever been the slightest attempt to limit Church membership to those who accept Theosophical teachings. To quote from an official leaflet issued by the province of Great Britain and Ireland, the aim has always been to have a Catholic Church in which everyone who seeks the sacraments of Christ in the spirit of befitting reverence may come and receive them, regardless of theosophical convictions or of their lack, regardless also of whether belonging to any other church or not. The clergy of the liberal Catholic Church make no claim to temporal or spiritual domination over those people who adhere to the Church, nor do they seek to control the consciences of individuals. Auricular confession is entirely optional and voluntary, and is never required as a preliminary to the reception of Holy Communion. Almost all the clergy are unpaid, and it is expressly laid down that no fee may be exacted for administering the sacraments or for other spiritual work. Wherever practicable, the Church places the administration of its finances in the hands of the laity by means of elected representatives. Because few of the clergy ever receive stipends, they have to maintain themselves in the manner of the early apostles, each by his own trade or profession. As a result, in the very mobile society of today, liberal Catholic clergy move about a great deal. Wherever such a priest finds himself, he sets up an altar in his house, says Mass as regularly and as frequently as his circumstances permit, and tries to reach out to any receptive souls in his vicinity. After a while, he may be moved to some other part of the country, and he has to start all over again. In their more settled parishes, they sometimes draw quite cosmopolitan congregations of theosophically minded persons. In its own way, the liberal Catholic Church does appear to fill a need in the lives of a fair number of people who, for various reasons, cannot find themselves at home in Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Anglican, or Protestant Christianity. Few of the religious bodies dealt with in this book can claim that they were carried on for nearly 30 years without one or more schisms, but such was the case with the liberal Catholic Church. During the Second World War, however, difficulties arose in the United States province, due mainly to the independent line of action adopted by Charles Hampden, who had been consecrated in September 1931 as auxiliary bishop for the USA. Most of the clergy appear to have sided with Hampden after he was formally deposed by the General Episcopal Synod of the Liberal Catholic Church on May 1, 1944. Some of them rallied under Ray M. Wardall, consecrated in October 1926 as suffragan bishop for the USA. The confusion was increased when the presiding bishop of the church, Frank W. Piggott, appointed John T. Elkland as regionary bishop pro tem for the USA, so there were now three groups of the liberal Catholic Church in North America. On June 8, 1947, Elkland raised to the episcopate as his auxiliaries Newton A. Dahl and Walter J. Zollinger. On September 14th that same year, Wardell consecrated Edward M. Matthews, the recently deposed dean of the Liberal Catholic Cathedral at Los Angeles. The presiding bishop, Piggott, then stated that the Wardell-Matthews body had no further connection with the Liberal Catholic Church. Since then, Piggott and Elkland have died, and so have Hampden and Wardell. After some years of litigation, the Supreme Court of the State of California gave judgment on April 13, 1961, that the only legal liberal Catholic church in the USA was the group under Bishop Matthews. Independently of these dissensions in North America, Johann Hubert Bonhoeffer, consecrated by Wedgwood as auxiliary bishop for Holland in April 18, 1928, and who in 1948 became regionary bishop for South Africa, broke away from the liberal Catholic Church. In 1959, he formed an independent body, which was incorporated in the Netherlands as Broederschap van het Heilig Sacrament. Brotherhood of the Blessed Sacrament. Its members claim to accept the whole of the Christian tradition, Eastern as well as Western, not confining themselves to one of the Theosophic movements. After Bishop Bonhoeffer had raised J. H. Dubing to the episcopate, he and his disciples decided to link up with the Matthews Group of the Liberal Catholic Church in North America. Bonhoeffer was appointed its bishop commissary for Europe. Sometime in 1957, Bishop Hampton of Los Angeles, long after he had been deposed by the presiding bishop of the Liberal Catholic Church, consecrated Herman S. Spruitt. The former Methodist minister was a theosophist who had formed a sect known as the Church Universal. On June 23, 1959, there took place what was described as the consummation of the merger of the Church Universal and the United Episcopal Church, Christian Catholic. The quarters of Archbishop Spruitt's coat of arms blazon a swastika or cross gamma, certain Masonic emblems, and a menorah of seven-branch candlestick, together with a host en soleil and two keys crossed per saltire. This mixture of symbols suggests the eclectic element in the training given at the St. Sophia Theological Seminary and in the sermons preached at St. Michael's Church, Downey, California, the headquarters of the Christian Catholic Church Universal. One detects a certain affinity between this heraldry with the Order of the Holy Wisdom, Ecclesia Hagia Sophiae, founded by Mar Basilius Abdullah III, Sovereign Prince Patriarch of Antioch, on the borders of Epping Forest, England in 1943. At the time of writing, the presiding bishop of the original Liberal Catholic Church is Adrian G. Vreed, who was consecrated on August 15, 1926 by Wedgwood, assisted by Piggott, Hounsfield, Tettemer, and Bonhoeffer, as Regionary Bishop for the Netherlands Indies. In Europe, there are Regionary Bishops for the Diocese of Austria, Germany, and the German-speaking parts of Switzerland. Also for France, French Africa, and the French-speaking cantons of Switzerland. The Italian diocese is directly subject to the presiding bishop. Belgium and Holland form a province under a Regionary Bishop. The Scandinavian countries have a Regionary Bishop with the appropriate name of Otto Viking, with assistant bishops for Sweden and Finland. Australia and New Zealand, where liberal Catholicism took root 40 years ago, now form separate provinces, divided in dioceses. The Regionary Bishop for the USA, Newton A. Dahl, has his headquarters at 3342 Oakland Avenue, Minneapolis 7, Minnesota, and he has 3 episcopal assistants. More recently, the church has spread to Central and South America, where provinces have been erected. In 1961, they were as follows: 1. Cuba, plus certain other countries. 2. Colombia and the surrounding countries. 3. Greater South America, republics of Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Chile, Paraguay, and Bolivia. Great Britain and Ireland now have Sir Benjamin Hugh Sykes, a baronet of the United Kingdom, as their Regionary Bishop, with Bishop J.B.S. Coates as his auxiliary. His London Cathedral, dedicated to St. Mary, is located in the Holy Land of Islington, about a quarter of a mile from where in 1909 Bishop Matthew raised a former Congregationalist chapel to the status of an Old Catholic pro-cathedral. Nearby, too, is Matilda Street, where in 1935 Mar Kwame, Metropolitan of the Autonomous African Universal Church, consecrated Mar Frederick, founder of the Orthodox Celtic Church of the British Commonwealth of Nations, in the tiny oratory dedicated to St. Ignatius of Antioch. Standing on the triangle between Caledonian and Hillmartin Roads, a few yards north of Caledonian Road Station on the Piccadilly Line, St. Mary's Cathedral is a fairly typical specimen of mid-Victorian Gothic Revival English nonconformist architecture. Set back in a smoke-grimed garden, it must be admitted that it hardly attains to the richly symbolical ideal of a liberal Catholic place of worship depicted in some of the illustrations of Bishop Leadbeater's Science of the Sacraments, nor is the well-cared-for galleried interior, evocative of an old-fashioned, not very extreme Anglo-Catholic church, sufficiently inspiring to encourage trying to get in touch on the astral with the Lord Maitreya, Master Kuthumi, or any of the other masters who were venerated by pious liberal Catholics Catholics in the good old days. If Leadbeater were still alive, would he maintain that these stone walls in North London conserve magnetism quite as effectively as those of his copper-lined room at Sydney, New South Wales? If he were pontificating in Gothic revival vestments, as perhaps he still does on the Astral, at the Baroque high altar, would he see wonderful forces going up in colors through the roof? Very likely he would assure us that on Sunday evening the spire positively shimmers with rays and sub-rays as powerful vibrations flow from the host at benediction. In fact, Dr. Beeching may yet have to complain to the Baron at Legionary Bishop that these vibrations disturb the diesel engines hauling the Aberdonian and other expresses on the main line north of King's Cross Station as they emerge from the tunnel below the cathedral. Possibly psychic passengers on the Piccadilly tube trains passing immediately beneath the building also perceive peculiar paranormal sensations. It is a pity that liberal Catholicism in London lacks a better advertisement than this little Gothic revival cathedral, for it fails to impress the fact that this body is still very much alive in many countries, judging from reports printed in the Liberal Catholic and Ubique and Ubique. All the other bodies of which A.H. Matthew was the direct or indirect progenitor have been failures to a greater or lesser degree, but the Liberal Catholic Church, even if today it consists of two rival sections, has not only managed to keep going, but has spread over the greater part of the world. 4. The Church Catholic. After the most illustrious and most reverend Count Llandaff of Thomastown in Ireland had suspended the Right Reverend Frederick Samuel Willoughby, the bishop at St. Pancras, from the exercise of holy orders, and dismissed him from what was now called the Old Roman Catholic Church, 6 months after he had raised him to the episcopate in the banqueting hall of the Bell Hotel, Bromley, Kent, this ex-Anglican clergyman felt at liberty to make use of his powers according to his own conscience. Within 4 months he had consecrated Bernard Gauntlet and Robert King, both of them active members of the Theosophical Society. The following year, on November 5, 1916, in the Theosophical Temple, Blomfield Road, Maida Vale, London, W9, he found convincing reasons to raise to the episcopate another of Matthew's former priests, named Frederick James. The versatile new prelate, in the capacity of what would now be called a prêtre ouvrier, earned his living as a music teacher, a professor of elocution, and an actor. Monsignor James, to give him the title he preferred, opened a public oratory in St. John's Wood, and held services in other parts of London for the spiritual benefit of a handful of like-minded theosophists. This apostolate was interrupted when he left England for the Far East to serve with the YMCA as a war worker with the Duke of Cornwall's light infantry. On returning to civil life, James resumed his episcopal status and reorganized his disciples under the title of the Church Catholic. He found a place of worship for them in a hall in Princess Street, Cavendish Square. Here, the services continued until 1927, when he acquired premises at 23 Basil Street, Knightsbridge, behind Harrods, which he called the Sanctuary. His palace was a flat above the church, and before long he managed to gather round him a small but smart congregation. One of his most active members was the late Duke of Leeds. The religion invented by Monsignor James, like that of Rudolf Steiner's Christian community, was encouragingly eclectic. It is surprising that it did not have a wider appeal, for he stated in one of his official publications that the creed of the sanctuary is, "I believe in God," and it reduces all ethics to one of non-injury. There is no belief in any special divine revelation, but revelation unfolds in the process of natural and spiritual evolution as the mind of man expands. The teaching given at the sanctuary is not dogmatic. It is to be accepted only insofar as it may strike a responsive chord within the soul. The aim should be to demonstrate in one's own life that the divine love, when understood and lived, leads to spiritual regeneration. Taken all round, the religion of the Church Catholic was a variant of theosophy, much of it more or less identical with the official teaching of the liberal Catholic Church. Converts were told that a church that is Catholic must include all sects, creeds, and religions. It should be a universal brotherhood, for the link joining all men is divine love. Religion is life, not a creed. The eternal principles were laid down by our Lord of Nazareth and the other great world teachers. If they be followed, the divine love, divine light, and divine life will be manifest in earthly life, and those of the faith will become instruments of service to humanity. On November 21, 1932, the Daily Express described the sanctuary as the ballroom church of all creeds, telling its readers that the religion set forth by Monsignor James embraced every creed from Hinduism to Protestantism. Attention was drawn to the images of Christ and Buddha on either side of the apse facing each other. The Sunday services featured Mass and benediction. The Church Catholic was in advance of the Roman Church, for at the back of Herod's, an evening Eucharist for communion was held every first Sunday at 9:30 p.m., anticipating by nearly 30 years the permission for evening Masses granted by Pius XII. The ideal aimed at in these services was to establish communion with God in the kingdom of heaven that is within. Monsignor James was broad-minded enough to borrow from Quakers as well as Buddhists. He explained that silent prayer and meditation take the place of the vocal prayers contained in the missals and liturgies. The doors of the sanctuary were closed 10 minutes before the services started. Corporate participation in worship was far from encouraged, since absolute silence was obligatory. Consecrated oil was administered when desired. Incense was used generously to awaken the theosophist inner self. There were rumors that the fully initiated members of this little flock off Knightsbridge indulged in occult ceremonies behind locked doors. Whether this was so or not, the idea of polarity was certainly there, for in his public services, Monsignor James, like the priest of the Christian community, was assisted by male and female acolytes, who were said to symbolize the positive and negative as expressed in sex. The sanctuary closed its doors for the last time during the Second World War, when its founder retired into private life. He has now passed on. 5. Old Catholic Orthodox Church, Apostolic Service Church, originally the Independent Catholic Church. Kelly's handbook to the titled Landed and Official Classes informs us that this most exclusive body of the Matthew succession was founded by the Most Reverend James Bartholomew Banks, PGM, KV, PG, MSE, PhD, born on August 15, 1894. He is the only son of Bartholomew Young Banks of the Park, Sutton Bridge, Westbeck, and Thorney, Tid St. Mary, Cams, J.P., for the parts of Holland, Links, 1928. His mother was Mary Adela, eldest daughter of James Tyler of Gedney Marsh, Links, educated at Woodbridge School, Suffolk, and Wells and Lichfield theological colleges. He served in the Artists' Rifles during the First World War. He was ordained priest in 1921 and to the episcopate by Bishop Willoughby in July 9, 1922. The new prelate opened a place of worship in Maiden Lane, off the Strand, London, called the Church of the Great Sacrifice. In after years, he stated that being the outcome of the 1914 to 1918 war, this church existed as a living memorial to our loved ones who made the supreme sacrifice, believing it to be their command in going over the top to fearlessly teach the divine truths, free from all distortions. At the same time, he gave his few followers the name of the Independent Catholic Church. On December 31, 1924, Monsignor Banks announced his election as Patriarch of Windsor. 2 years later, he published the constitution of what had now been renamed the Old Catholic Orthodox Church, Apostolic Service Church. The organization was described as a body of Old Catholics which came into a separate existence in 1925 and accepts the dogmatic decrees of the Holy Synod of Jerusalem 1672, held by the Greek Orthodox Church. The objects of this new body were defined as follows. A. The promotion of the Catholic faith by all legitimate means, as being the only form of religion and philosophy directly of divine institution, and therefore most satisfactorily suited to deal with present-day problems, and in the development of this, the restatement of that faith in terms of its relation to modern thought. B. The reunion of absorbing of the various divisions now existing in Christendom. The Constitution set forth that the sovereign primate would be assisted by a sacred synod composed of 4 sovereign primatial chaplains, each a bishop, a chancellor, episcopal barrister, prelates, protonotary apostolic, and nuncios apostolic. In addition to these officials, there would be a sovereign primatial bodyguard enlisted from loyal service and ex-servicemen in uniform. These gentlemen would be entrusted with the military and ceremonial side of pontifical functions performed by the Patriarch. Provision was made also for grand magistries of the sovereign and most noble religious and chivalrous orders of the Saint Esprit, Keys and Vigil, and Saint Couronne. This showed that the old Catholic Orthodox Church, with its patriarchal curia at Windsor, intended to rival the most noble order of the Garter. The sovereign primate also indicated that he had faculties to confer degrees in arts, divinity, literature, philosophy, law, sacred science, music, and divine healing. It will be seen that his powers were far wider than those wielded by the Dean and Chapter of the Royal Chapel of St. George within His Majesty's Castle of Windsor. The clergy of the old Catholic Orthodox Church would be formed, if possible, of men who had served or who were serving in some branch of the fighting forces and whose vocation to the sacred ministry had been proved. Under no circumstances would the ordination of women be permitted. In this respect, the Patriarch of Windsor was not so broad-minded as Mardoreos, Archbishop of Caerleon, and he would have been the first to denounce the later Mariavite and only Holy Catholic custom of raising ladies to the episcopate. In emulation of the liberal Catholic Church and the ancient Catholic Church, he welcomed all baptized persons of any denomination whatsoever to receive communion. Would-be catechumens were told that the old Catholic Orthodox Church was a unique and real memorial, where service and ex-servicemen and others of all nationalities, friend and foe, may meet as brothers in common remembrance of those who made the supreme sacrifice. One of the special objects of this new church would be to foster the great gift of spiritual healing, which, so it was stated, had been more or less ignored by other organizations of the Holy Catholic Church. Special services would be held for this purpose, to which the sick and the suffering would be invited. Some of the doctrines set forth left no doubt that the old Catholic Orthodox Church was striving hard to restate the faith in terms of its relation to modern thought, as understood in the 1920s. For instance, the Father-Motherhood of God was taught, and another belief, hardly in keeping with the Holy Synod of Jerusalem of 1672, or the Greek Orthodox Church, was that it did not matter what creed the dear departed professed, or even none at all, because they could all be aided in their spiritual progress after transition by the thoughts and prayers of those remaining on earth. Another doctrine which may have surprised old-fashioned persons who were not keeping abreast with modern thought was that evolution, or spiritual unfoldment of man, takes place under an inviolable law of cause and effect. As early as 1922, Monsignor Banks had published the first edition of the Holy Liturgy and other rites for use in his independent Catholic Church. The later editions of this new liturgy, even more than the first, offered adherents a rich and elaborate form of worship. The calendar, a veritable war cry, stressed the military and patriotic character of the Monsignor Banks Church. He had no sympathy with the pacifist ideals propagated by Mar Jacobus, Bishop of Murcia and Middlesex. Among the collection of hymns printed was the following: "Their long way to Tipperary was much shorter than we thought, but they never feared that journey, nor the anguish that it brought. May we ask thee then, beloved, to unite with them and know that we're with them marching onward and progressing as we go." Provision was made for solemn commemorations of dates associated with warfare. The new festivals to be observed included Zeebrugge Day, April 23rd, Anzac Day, April 25th, Ireland's Remembrance Day, August 22nd, Trafalgar Day, October 21st, and Armistice Day, November 11th. The papally imposed Feast of Christ the King, 1929, was adopted by the Lord Patriarch James I, who, in emulation of Bishops Wedgwood and Leadbeater, also anticipated Pope John XXIII by changing the octave of the Epiphany to the baptism of our Lord. At the same time, the faithful were taught how to readjust their faith in terms of modern thought, and were reminded that man is a link in the vast chain of lives leading from the highest to the lowest, as he helps those below him on the ladder of lives, receiving thus a free gift of grace. Their Lord Patriarch proclaimed, "We look through reincarnation, which is the only teaching concerning immortality consistent with the God of love and justice, to the coming universal brotherhood, for which we daily pray." Did the more simple-minded and less educated feel that some of these doctrines were identical with those propagated by the liberal Catholic Church, and wonder why it had been necessary to found a rival body? In 1936, so it is stated in Kelly's handbook to the titled, landed, and official classes, Monsignor Banks became the first Universal Patriarch Archbishop of the Old Catholic Orthodox Church, on that church being incorporated with the Independent Catholic Church, Ancient Catholic Church, and Apostolic Service Church. He moved the headquarters of his united body from Windsor to East Molesey, Surrey, where he founded the Priory Church of St. Michael and All Angels, adjacent to the patriarchal residence in Maytham Road. Here on the banks of the Little River Mole, on the feast of St. Augustine of Canterbury, May 28, 1940, His Excellency James I, Universal Patriarch Archbishop of the Old Catholic Orthodox Church, pursuant to letters dismissory issued by Archbishop Daniel C. Hinton, Primate of the American Catholic Church, raised to the episcopate the Reverend Sidney Ernest Page Needham, since 1925 Rector of Farthinghoe in the Anglican Diocese of Peterborough, Archbishop of the Orthodox Catholic Province of Our Lady of England in Devon and Cornwall. The new prelate, who was married, took the title of Mar Theodorus, Bishop of Mercia. He was able to retain Farthinghoe Rectory as his palace and to benefit by the emoluments of the living, for the canon law of the Church of England makes no provision for the deprivation of priests who have obtained the episcopate elsewhere. Archbishop Hinton, resident in Chicago, appointed him as the episcopal head of the University of Sulgrave, the Northamptonshire village of this name, about 6 miles southwest of Farthinghoe, was the ancestral home of George Washington's family. The American Catholic Church had managed to obtain a charter for this university from the state legislature of Delaware, and it followed much the same method of conferring degrees as the Lloyd Sibley Intercollegiate University, whose goodwill it had inherited. But it did not function for very long, because questions were soon asked about it in Parliament. Eventually, both the Spectator and the Cambridge Review managed to ridicule this Anglo-American university out of existence. To forestall action being taken by American universities, Sulgrave applied to the state of Delaware for the annulment of its charter. On January 4, 1945, Mar Theodorus exchanged consecrations with the already much consecrated Mar Georgius. The ceremony took place in the Episcopal Oratory of Saints Mary and John at Farthinghoe Rectory. For a year, Needham combined the duties of a priest of the Diocese of Peterborough in the province of Canterbury with those of a bishop in the Eparchy of all the Britons within the Catholicate of the West. His diocese embraced the counties of Berks, Northends, and Oxon. Mar Theodorus retired from Farthinghoe in 1946, and his name continued to appear in Crockford. He died at his home near Newbury, Berkshire, on October 2, 1962. In the spring of 1948, following conditional baptism, confirmations, and minor orders, the Universal Patriarch Banks reordained up to the priesthood the Reverend J. E. Basil Corbin, rector of Runwell St. Mary, Essex, who on April 3rd the same year was raised to the episcopate by Mar Georgius. It was the patriarchal chapel at East Molesey that Mar Georgius reordained Monsignor van Ryswyk up to the priesthood on November 6, 1949. Among later ordinations performed by the Universal Patriarch was that of Francis E. Glenn, who was consecrated by Bishop Schonbrut in 1957, and who is now head of the Church and Order of the Servants of Christ. Although the Patriarch Banks had been leading a more or less hidden life for close on 30 years, attracting very little publicity, the Daily Sketch decided that he had news value. On February 9, 1955, this widely read paper devoted an illustrated article to him. The now 62-year-old prelate revealed to the reporter that he did not have to endure the poverty of Archbishop A. H. Matthew in his latter years, for he had been left £10,000 as the residue of his father's £120,000 estates at Tid St. Mary and Thorney, Cambridgeshire. His Excellency was described as thick-set, bespectacled, wearing riding breeches, Stetson-style hat, and waterproof coat, with a jeweled ring on one of his fingers. Outside the 16-roomed priory at East Molesey, where he resided, was a small but dignified church. The Universal Patriarch Archbishop's personal standard of fleur-de-lis fluttered on a 50-foot-high flagpole. Since then, very little has been heard of the Old Catholic Orthodox Church. So far as is known, no recent statistics have been published. There have been no press releases from the Sacred Synod and its 4 sovereign primatial chaplains as a bishop. It would be surprising if the sovereign primatial bodyguard were still able to attract recruit in sufficient numbers to add color and dignity to pontifical functions in the Priory Church of St. Michael and All Angels by their striking uniforms. And finally, as neither Whitaker's Almanac nor Kelly's Handbook of the titled, landed, and official classes includes the orders of the Saint Esprit, Keys and Vigil, and Saint Couron among the orders of chivalry, it has been impossible to obtain particulars of their present knights companions. Apart from Archbishop W. H. Francis, consecrated in 1916, who reduced to the status of mitred archpriest of the Russian Orthodox Catholic Church in America, the Universal Patriarch Banks, consecrated in 1922, is the oldest surviving bishop of the Matthew succession, and certainly the senior in date among them. 6. The Old Catholic Evangelical Church of God and the Old Holy Catholic Church. It is a matter of opinion whether the Old Catholic Evangelical Church of God and its offspring, the Old Holy Catholic Church, can be included with the churches of the Matthew succession. A recently published statement of tenets drawn up by the hierarchy of the Old Holy Catholic Church indicates that it has repudiated the Matthew succession, for it affirms, "Our succession is Old Catholic, Church of Utrecht, and derived prior to such time as that church fell under suspicion of heresy." This takes the succession back nearly 300 years, because accusations of Jansenism were first launched from Rome against the Dutch Catholics in 1697. If this statement is historically justified, then there must have been a link between the Old Holy Catholic Church and some unspecified Dutch bishop during the 17th century. On the other hand, Archbishop Ignatius Carolus, primate of the OHCC, wrote in December 1962, "Our orders are direct through Patriarch Banks and Mar Georges, the latter through Archbishop Nicholson and Archbishop Singer, Mar Philippus." This raises further problems because, as was explained on page 370, the Patriarch Banks was raised to the episcopate by Bishop Willoughby in 1922, who had been consecrated by Archbishop A.H. Matthew in 1914. The last name derived his episcopate from Dr. Gull, Old Catholic Archbishop of Utrecht, in 1908, and never claimed a pre-1697 line of succession. Again, it is not certain who it was who ordained priest and consecrated, apparently in 1924, Matthew Cooper, a second-hand furniture dealer at Greenwich, who was the founder of the Old Catholic Evangelical Church of God. Statements made from time to time that it was the Patriarch Banks have been strenuously denied by His Excellency, so the whole matter is shrouded in mystery. Cooper adopted the style of Archbishop Matthew, but to save confusion with the de jure Earl of Llandaff, it is best to refer to him as Archbishop Cooper. Like his contemporary, Monsignor Williams, Archbishop of Caerglow, he used to proclaim that his little sect, which had no connection with the old Roman Catholic Church, pro-Uniat Rite, had been founded by St. Willibrord and his 11 companions, who in the 7th century evangelized the Cati, Batavi, and Frisians. The Anglo-Saxon rite they took from England to the Netherlands had managed to survive for 1300 years and had been transplanted to Greenwich in the 2nd decade of the 20th century. The members of this body, the aims and objects of which were not clearly defined, were never very numerous during the 30 or so years that it existed. Their original headquarters was at 25 Gloucester Circus, Greenwich, not far from the Roman Catholic Church of Our Lady Star of the Sea on Crooms Hill. If the Old Catholic Evangelical Church of God did nothing else, it provided a spiritual home for those who found the discipline of both Anglo and Roman Catholicism too rigid for their temperaments. In September 1942, 1952, when the Archbishop was living at 64 Grove Road, Mitcham, Surrey. A clerical neighbor called to pay his respects and found His Grace brilliantly arrayed in vestments, scarlet cap to match. The 60-year-old prelate explained that he was a widower, and that before he became an old Catholic he had been keenly interested in all forms of philanthropic work, especially St. Giles' Mission. There was a small oratory in his house, furnished complete with a throne, and filled with incense fumes. At the date he had 6 priests working under his jurisdiction, all of whom were engaged in secular jobs during the week, and received no payment for their ministrations. Although they used the Roman Missal in English, one of them expressed the opinion that their work was purely evangelical. Accordingly, this tiny sect stood somewhat aloof from all other bodies claiming to be Old Catholic. Archbishop Cooper informed his guest that he felt he had a special mission to those who belonged either to no religious persuasion or who had lost their faith. It was definitely not a refuge for extreme Anglo-Catholics who were averse to the Baroque and Rococo movement in their own churches, unless their souls thirsted for the gospel religion as preached by St. Willibrord in the 7th century. Eventually, the Old Catholic Evangelical Church of God had 33 priests and 5 bishops, but 13 of these clerics deserted their primate. It must be admitted that the Old Man of Greenwich, as his clergy referred to him, was sometimes hard to get on with. Apparently, he accepted men for the ministry without making due investigation of their antecedents and giving them adequate training for pastoral work. The result in the long run was that 2 of his priests obtained regrettable publicity in the national newspapers. One of these, brought up an Anglican, failed to find a bishop to ordain him and sought refuge in the Church of Rome. His experiences among papists, however, were so shocking that he reverted to communion with Canterbury for a year or 2, only to suffer further disillusionment. Having investigated all other religious bodies in Britain, he decided to join the Old Catholic Evangelical Church of God, which seemed to offer the purest form of Christianity. The kind-hearted Archbishop Cooper had no doubt that this seeker after truth had a clear vocation for the sacred ministry, and lost no time in raising him to the priesthood. But so strong was the convert's nostalgia for dignified Anglican ritual and ceremonial that it was lucky that 4 or 5 bishops accepted his orders as genuine Old Catholic, apparently not realizing that the little sect to which he belonged was not in communion with the Church of England. Meanwhile, wishing to ensure an absolutely valid apostolic succession, he had himself reordained by another freelance prelate. After this fairly long Anglican interlude, much enjoyed while it lasted, he received Archbishop Cooper's blessing on the proposed foundation of an Old Catholic Evangelical Theological College, which, like Kelham and Mirfield, would be directed by a religious community, and the following advertisement was inserted in the personal columns of a certain Sunday newspaper. Gentlemen wanted for ordination in ancient foundation, and as members of a community Catholic, not Roman Catholic, all details from the Reverend Superior. More than 30 gentlemen, including 2 clergymen already ordained, sought information. Literature was sent them, describing the observances of this venerable community of St. Willibrord and its spacious buildings. But it was not long before another newspaper discovered that the community existed only in the vivid imagination of its would-be founder. The eventual result was that he abandoned Archbishop Cooper and found a prelate of a revival church of the Matthew family to give him conditional reordination up to the priesthood. As is related elsewhere in this book, the foundation of religious communities which never materialized is a not uncommon phenomenon in the autocephalous churches of the past 100 years. The Old Holy Catholic Church evolved out of the Old Catholic Evangelical Church of God in 1955. Little has been recorded about the early life of its founder, Charles Brearley, but it appears that from boyhood, like the cleric just mentioned, he was convinced that God was calling him to serve the Lord and to save sinners. Brearley is said to have earned his living in manual occupations, and later on to have engaged in evangelistic work with the church army. Stories that he tried to persuade several bishops of different denominations to ordain him have been strenuously denied. Also, that in the early 30s he had found secular employment in Sheffield. No matter, eventually he became the lay minister of a small independent Protestant mission chapel at Healy, a southern suburb of the city. Having no narrow sectarian scruples, he appealed to Archbishop Cooper, who on Sunday, January 31st, 1954, laid hands on him in a rented room at Sheffield. The new prelate was placed in charge of the northern province of the Old Catholic Evangelical Church of God, which had very few adherents in Yorkshire at that date. So far as is known, the name of the bishop who raised Brearley to minor and major orders up to the priesthood has never been published. Archbishop Cooper returned to London after a weekend in Sheffield, and it was not long before he broke off relations with his northern metropolitan. The reason given was that both Bishop Brearley and Dr. Pitt Kethley, then acting as archdeacon, wished for what was described as a more democratic way of church government, to which the archbishop was opposed. Finding himself definitely a bishop at large in Yorkshire, subject to no higher authority but God, and apparently not content with the Old Catholic succession believed to have been derived from Cooper, Brearley welcomed an invitation from Mar Philippus, PCS singer, to be reconsecrated at his hands. It was a tempting offer because it guaranteed the 18 or more lines of succession understood to have been imparted to Mar Philippus by Mar Joannes, Archbishop of Carine, by way of Mar Georges, Patriarch of Glastonbury. So he went to London and called on Mar Philippus, who had recently assumed the primacy of a tiny sect known as the New Catholic and Free Church, of which he was the founder. On Sunday, November 14, 1954, the two bishops exchanged consecrations in a room of a house at 5 Bramshill Road North, 10, which served Mar Philippus as a pro-cathedral. It seems to have been on this occasion that Brearley met for the first time Mr. Leslie Peirce and his wife Maureen, both Theosophists and members of the Liberal Catholic Church, a meeting that was to have unforeseen influence on his future career. By way of trial and error, the former church army evangelist and independent Protestant minister was gradually finding his way towards a species of Catholicism which, so it must be admitted, has always remained somewhat fluid in doctrine and discipline so far as outsiders can make out. Bishop Brearley soon acquired news value in South Yorkshire, and with good reason, for he could now proclaim that he was the 137th in line from St. Peter the Apostle as first Bishop of Antioch. On February 21, 1955, the Sheffield Telegraph published a full-length photograph of him in cope and mitre taken outside of St. Peter's Mission Chapel at Healy. Towards the end of that same year, the twice consecrated prelate was obliged to resign his charge and to close the ministerial training college he had opened in this suburb of Sheffield. Mrs. Peirce had invited him to become her resident chaplain at Cusworth Hall near Doncaster. Hitherto, the chapel had been served by a priest of the Liberal Catholic Church, but the first thing Bishop Brearley did was to expunge any reference to theosophy in the liturgical books used. By this time, he had severed all associations with both the Old Catholic Evangelical Church of God and the New Catholic and Free Church. It is understood that he disapproved of Mar Philippus's alleged dabbling in Spiritism and his conferring valid orders on nonconformist ministers. Bishop Brearley remained at Cusworth from December 1955 to July 1956. Several impressive pontifical functions took place in the sumptuous Baroque chapel, dating from 1740. One of the first was the ordination of a deacon and priest, at which Archbishop Matthias Victor Schonbrut assisted, as well by the titular abbess of Bethany, Mrs. Peirce. December 15, 1955, appears to have been the date when Brearley, who about this time assumed the title of Archbishop of Dunham, the ancient name of Doncaster, raised to the episcopate George William Boyer as Bishop of Boston. Possibly anxious to hold his own with the two rival metropolitans, Dr. Garbett, Archbishop of York, and Monsignor Godfrey, Archbishop of Liverpool, the Archbishop of Dunham added to his hierarchy on May 20th, 1956, by consecrating Henry Francis Angold. Unfortunately, some people did not grasp the spiritual significance of the ceremonies performed in the private chapel of this South Yorkshire mansion. The eventual result was nationwide publicity in more than one newspaper, including a photograph of His Grace vested in cope and mitre, conferring a university degree. Although the Archbishop complained that most of the statements printed were lies, he was forced to become inactive for a time, so the liberal Catholic Lady Abbess lost the services of her chaplain, but he maintains that at no period of his career has he ever countenanced theosophy or similar heresies. The persecuted prelate received no further publicity for nearly a year. Meanwhile, Archbishop Cooper had resigned the primacy of the Old Catholic Evangelical Church of God on account of his age and failing health, and was living in retirement. The autocephalous church he had founded at Greenwich in 1924 faded out, and little more was heard of it. The storm having blown over, the Archbishop of Durham felt able to rally his forces and to revive the body for which he had been originally consecrated, but on more up-to-date lines as a New Age ecumenical institution. He renamed it the Old Holy Catholic Church. One of his clerics persuaded him to adopt the names Ignatius Carolus, in spite of his own dislike of flamboyant titles, and with the prefix His Grace Most Reverend. A wide range of erudition was suggested by the degrees of M.A., Doctor of Divinity, Literature Doctorate, and DCL. An organization called the Union of Churches is said to have appointed him primate. The headquarters of the new body was set up in a housing estate in the Maynard district of Sheffield. Although His Grace's Anglican v. Bishop Hunter could add M.A., DCL, Doctor of Divinity, and LLD to his name, he may have envied the magnificent heraldic blazon displayed in a circle 1.5 inches in diameter, displayed in a circle on the primatial writing paper. It was the future Bishop Turner, so Archbishop Brearley relates, who devised the coat of arms and persuaded his primate to have it printed. The shield was superimposed on a patriarchal cross, crozier, and one key, surmounted by a heraldic archiepiscopal hat, with the words Ignatius Carolus de Archiepiscopus Catholicae within the circle. The motto chosen was Fides Spes Charitas. An impressive statement was issued in 1957, explaining the nature, scope, and origins of this New Age institution, with its roots in apostolic tradition. The remote founder, so it appeared, was St. Willibrord, the 7th century Northumbrian monk who evangelized the Netherlands. We are proud to acknowledge him as one of our earlier primates, the primate asserted. Thanks to Arnold Harris Matthew, consecrated as regional Old Catholic Bishop for Britain in 1908, the Willibrordian line of apostolic succession had passed on to the Old Holy Catholic Church, which also claimed to have acquired the Antiochian, Assyrian, and other lines. This New Age institution should have appealed especially to the female sex, because it acknowledged the sacred ministry of women, claimed to have full biblical support. The lady bishops, priests, and deacons were known as abbesses, prioresses, and deaconesses. As in the case of male ordinands, they were given minor orders before being raised to the priesthood or episcopate. Both ladies and gentlemen were warned that admission to the sacred ministry would not be easy, since a high standard of spiritual experience was demanded. There was no room for persons of either sex who just wished to have clerical status, because the object of this new church, both in the realm of Britain and overseas, was to bring the people of all nations into a dynamic touch with the Lord Jesus Christ, whom to know is life eternal. The training would be long and hard, with no prospect of large stipends. That the Old Holy Catholic Church was not just another little nonconformist sect was made clear in another brochure, which stated, "Our primate is the Most Reverend Ignatius Carolus, Doctor of Divinity, DCL, who has been honored by many European and American universities, and is by appointment from the sovereign head of the House of Dales in Italy, Prince of Villiers. We know him as Father Charles." It should be explained that both during and after the Second World War, various claimants to the throne of the Byzantine Empire were generous in bestowing titles and degrees on almost anyone who sought them. Alessandro Licastro della Shastra Gamaldi Liscaris, the sovereign head of the House of Dales in Italy, was one of the gentlemen who coveted imperial rank. Among his rivals was a youth whose followers addressed him as His Imperial Majesty Marziano II Lavarello Liscaris, and who in November 1956 was crowned and consecrated in Rome as Emperor of Constantinople and all the Christian East. Then there was also the de jure Emperor Eugenius, whose son, Prince Theodore Lascaris Comnenus, was president of the Imperial Byzantine University at Madrid, the Prince de Dales, who was consecrated at Milan by Archbishop Ignatius Carolus on June 15, 1957, needless to add, without the assistance of Cardinal Montini, who became Archbishop of Milan in 1954 and was elected Pope in 1963 with the title of Paul VI. The statement continued, "The Lady Abbess Superior is head of the women's work throughout the world, and is the Most Reverend Mary Frances, OSH, Doctor of Divinity, etc., Marquis de Saulnay. In the South, we have the Right Reverend Bishop William Turner, M.A., Doctor of Divinity, and in France, 2 bishops work with us, the Most Reverend Roger Regnier of Cologne and the Right Reverend Henry Ingle, Plantagenet in Paris. Italy has as its primate the Most Reverend Alex de Castro della Castre, Prince de Dales, and he lives in Rome. In Bari, there is another great scholar allied to us, Prince Amoroso d'Aragona, and in Cuba, the Most Reverend Fernandez Jain, Doctor of Divinity, while in America, Dr. Meeks, Dr. Voltros, and Dr. Parker are representing us. In Germany, we have Dr. the Right Reverend Hans Huer in Nuremberg, so you see we are worldwide in scope. Now for its scope. We are anxious to extend this scope outside our present boundaries, and in the past 12 months we have been able to penetrate into prisons, poorhouses, and hospitals with a message of cheer and blessing. There is no limit to our scope, and it must be pointed out that the Church consists of members, men and women, boys and girls, filled with the love of God, and willing to spend and be spent for His service. The published statements conveyed the idea that within 2 years of its foundation, the OHCC had spread so rapidly that it had branches in Italy, France, Germany, Cuba, North America, Poland, and Malaya. There were rumors that groups were being formed in Ireland and Ceylon. Strange to say, Dr. Wissert de Hooft had not seen his way to admit this apparently worldwide body to membership of the World Council of Churches, in spite of the fact that its object was said to be the promotion of the true Catholic doctrine and to unite the Christian churches into one body, wherever this is possible. 2 of his hierarchy having broken off relations, the Archbishop Primate consecrated William Handsworth Turner on December 15, 1957, as Bishop of London and the south of England. The new primate urged his primate to adopt the style of patriarch, and so did Archbishop Regnier, pointing out that he could well claim to be the supreme pontiff of an embryo universal church, but he told them that he had no use for pretentious titles, and that he much preferred being addressed as Father Charles. Considering the apparent international character of Old Holy Catholicism and its rapid growth, it is not surprising that the Archbishop soon found that his tireless efforts to establish a true Catholic Church in Britain and overseas were meeting with fierce opposition from the leaders of other Christian bodies, not only the churches of England and Rome, but even of the liberal Catholic Church. One of its priests, so His Grace became aware, had been harassing him for 3 years. Eventually, the long-suffering Prince Primate felt obliged to protest to the Baronet Legionary Bishop of the Liberal Catholic Church, Sir Benjamin Hugh Sykes. By this time, the official liturgy of the New Age institution, with its roots in apostolic tradition, was Bishop A. H. Matthews' Old Catholic Missal and Ritual, first published in 1909, but long since out of print. Mimeographed copies of the Common were distributed to the clergy, who had to make up the rest of the rite as best they could, with the help of either the Book of Common Prayer or vernacular Roman missals. An order of compline and administration of Holy Communion, with the reserved sacrament, was issued about the same time, and based on the ancient Catholic office as carried out in the Miracle Cathedral in Chelsea, compline, followed by solemn benediction with the monstrance, form the normal evening service in the oratories of the Old Holy Catholic Church. Far more in keeping, however, with the spirit of this new church, which, as Abbess Mary Frances explained, had come into being as an answer to the inarticulate cry of the millions groping for spiritual light, without being stifled by dogmas which they can neither understand nor accept, was the Liturgy of St. Hubert and the Church of the One Life, published at Hastings by her ladyship. The purpose of this profoundly occult and mystical rite, intended mainly for use in the chapel at Cusworth Hall, was to guide Christianity again to a knowledge of those spiritual truths which will place its teaching and worship upon a foundation rock of natural laws, a foundation which is not undermined but strengthened by the experimental research of the physicist, the archaeologist, the geologist, and the astronomer. The long outdated Nicene Creed was replaced by a new formula of belief, suggesting theosophical inspiration, and which could be recited by persons of almost any religion without conscientious scruples. It contained the words, "We hold the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, with all life, above and below him, on the endless ladder which all in turn ascend." At the end of the liturgy there were special intercessions for animal welfare, since it was vitally important to make all Christians realize that the animal creation of every species have their rightful place as our younger brethren, who shall all share our home, and who need our love and care. The Liturgy of St. Hubert had been issued without a nihil obstat and imprimatur by the Archbishop Primate. He was profoundly shocked by its heretical tendencies and forbade its use. But as the chapel at Cusworth Hall was a sort of ecclesiastical peculiar under the immediate jurisdiction of the Lady Abbess, it seems that she did not feel obliged to obey his orders. Although de facto a member of the OHCC, she remained loyal to her liberal Catholic beliefs, ubi libertas ibi ecclesia. Meanwhile, Cusworth Hall had become the spiritual powerhouse of the old Holy Catholic Church, where Lady Abbess Mary Frances, Marquis de Saulnay, directed the subsidiary orders, among which was the most sacred Order of St. Hubert, whose members, male and female, pledged themselves at their initiation to combat the evils of every kind of cruelty to animals. Also housed in this South Yorkshire mansion was the ministerial training college known as the Collegium, moved here from Sheffield. Another sphere of activity was an interdenominational Bible study circle. The Lady Abbess was left a widow on October 5, 1960. It has been stated that the Archbishop of Denham gave her a second episcopal consecration in 1959. He never became a permanent resident at Cusworth Hall after he ceased to be chaplain in June 1956. Eventually, the property passed into the hands of the Doncaster Corporation. This had involved the loss of the 18th century chapel, so an adjacent stable was refurnished as a place of worship, where, so it was hoped, men and women would find peace and take away an upliftment of soul, and where the sacredness of life in the animal kingdom would be taught. Everybody, regardless of creed, would be welcome to receive the sacraments if they wished. The titular abbess of Jerusalem, Mrs. Jessie Dove, was placed in charge of this shrine on the borders of the South Yorkshire coal mines. In recent years, Dr. Brearley's encyclopedic erudition, which, so it was stated, had already been honored by many European and American universities, though apparently not by any of the 21 degree-giving seats of learning in Great Britain, has been recognized by the Athenian Order, consisting of an elite of literati and illuminati who claim that their order was founded in 1580 by Francis Bacon, first Viscount St. Albans. It is composed of 3 triads of 33 persons, all British subjects, leal to the sovereign, ruled over by the Grand Maitre, Dr. Mabel Atkinson, Doctor of Divinity, Literature Doctorate, OSJ, from her sanctum, Wesley House, hidden in the heart of the Pennines, on the borders of Westmoreland and Yorkshire. Not only can Archbishop Ignatius Carolus style himself both Paladin of the Athenian Order and Prince de Villiers, he can now be addressed also as Grand Master of the Order of the Holy Cross of Jerusalem. Since this order of chivalry is not mentioned in either Whitaker's Almanac or any peerage known to the author, it is not possible to give any information about its history. It may be a British non-papal revival of the military order of the same name, founded in Bohemia during the 13th century. If so, then Archbishop Ignatius Carolus could claim the right to embroider a red six-pointed star on his cloak of state, as authorized by Pope Innocent IV in 1250. In spite of defamation and molestation by countless enemies, Anglo-Catholic, Roman Catholic, and Liberal Catholic, the Grand Master Paladin Prince Primate of the Old Holy Catholic Church sees signs in the heavens that a second spring is nigh, and that his New Age ecumenical institution is progressing, even if still weak financially, and obliged to worship in the catacombs, so to say. On July 3, 1960, he consecrated Ronald Marwood Watson, at one time associated with the Anglican Society of St. Francis at Cyrn Abbas, as Bishop for Yorkshire, giving him the style of Mar Gregorius Ibor. The ordination of a deacon followed in July 1962, and then Archbishop Ignatius Carolus had the consolation of receiving into fellowship a brother prelate, Dr. William Charles Cato Simmons, Bishop of Elmham, Norfolk, who resides at Staines, Middlesex. After 18 years as an Anglican clergyman, Mr. Cato Simmons joined the Free Protestant Episcopal Church, in which he was raised to the episcopate by Bishop Primus Boltwood at Easter 1962. But 3 months later came the call to secede to the Old Holy Catholic Church. Dr. Brearley at the time had 2 archdeacons working under him in the south of England, claimed communion with about a dozen autocephalous churches on the continent, and was about to go to France to consecrate 2 bishops, one of them an ex-Roman Catholic priest. In August 1962, the Reverend R. Dominic Bruce, M.A., who, in the course of a long career, had belonged to several religious bodies, and who since 1958 had been laying the foundations of the first parish over the border of the Old Roman Catholic Church, English Rite, decided to transfer his allegiance from Monsignor W.A. Barrington Evans, Archbishop of Verulam, to Archbishop Ignatius Carolus. The latter immediately raised the 75-year-old convert to the rank of Very Reverend Canon, awarded him the degree of Doctor of Divinity, and appointed him examining chaplain for Scottish ordinance. Convinced that God had called Canon Bruce to the episcopate, His Grace consecrated him as first Old Catholic Bishop of Scotia and the Isles on February 19, 1963. The function took place in the Canon's Presbytery at Auchterarder, Perthshire. The same day the English primate erected a Scottish province of the OHCC, although there were as yet no dioceses territorially contiguous to justify the formation of such an ecclesiastical unit. Neither had the aged metropolitan any minor or major clerics to assist him in his missionary labors, nor were there any places of worship other than his domestic oratory. It was a curious coincidence that Auchterarder should have been chosen as the birthplace of the Scottish province of this English autocephalous church, because it has been world famous since 1839 as the scene of the contest which led to the disruption of 1843 and the formation of the Free Church of Scotland. Dr. Bruce pointed out in the March 1963 number of Diocesan Notes, Perth and Kinross, bishops are anathema to the Scots. Mention such a person to any Scot, and at once he ceases to operate. This is where we have a great deal to overcome in this new province. The people must be trained in the acceptance of bishops as quite ordinary workers in the good cause or religion. The Bishop of Scotia and the Isles also informed his readers, said to number nearly 2,000, that before long there will be no congregation left in the established Church of Scotland, because few of its ministers pay any attention to the rising generation, hence the sacred duty of the OHCC to come to their rescue by means of evangelistic missions. In addition to the spiritual oversight of the whole of Scotland and its many islands, Bishop Bruce also holds the office as a Vicar General of the Fraternity of St. Willibrord and Superior of the Order of St. Dominic. The former, so he explained, was founded in 1945 with the object of campaigning against the evils of this wicked world and all the sinful lusts of the flesh. The latter is not an order in the Catholic meaning of the word, i.e. an institute whose members profess solemn vows, but a correspondence course for men interested in the ministry of the Church, which is an unpaid one. Diocesan Notes drew attention to universal churchcraft of Auchterarder and Leven, a firm under the direction of Bishop Bruce, which supplies the clergy with vestments and all church requisites, its special line being Mothers' Union banners for Anglican parishes. The constitutions and rules of the Old Holy Catholic Church, as revised in 1962, still found a place for women clergy with the title of abbess, prioress, and deaconess, but with the stipulation that they would never take precedence over male clergy of the same rank, although the authority of both were equal, and all were ordained with the same right. The Most Reverend Mary Frances still retained episcopal rank and authority. It was stated that the OHCC recognized the validity of orders and sacraments of unspecified churches in France, Italy, Cuba, California, Pennsylvania, Poland, Malaya, and Canada, striving to work and worship in communion with them. It appears that the realm of Britain is now divided into 4 provinces: Northern, Midland, Southern, and Scottish. The hierarchy at the time of writing consists of the primate, Bishops Bruce and Cato Simmons, with Bishops André Enos and Louis Canevet on the continent of Europe. Each province, so it is stated, is divided into districts under the oversight of an archdeacon or abbess. No statistics, however, are forthcoming of the number of priests in parishes or the estimated total of communicants. The headquarters of this still almost unknown body, claiming continuity with the supposedly non-Roman Catholic Church founded by St. Willibrord in the Netherlands more than 1,200 years ago, remain at 49 Ravencar Road, Sheffield, 2. We seek no grandeur, but intend to propagate the Catholic faith and purity, was the message sent out by the primate in December 1962. Meanwhile, His Grace, still insisting how he dislikes flamboyant titles and much prefers to be addressed as Father Charles, awaits offers of service from any cause to proclaim the uplifting of the Lord Jesus Christ, for this is all his heart's desire. The Free Anglo-Catholic Church and the Order of Lanthony Brothers. In December 1940, most of the independent Old Catholic clergy in England received a printed paper which read as follows: "As I have only recently returned to this country after an absence of close on 30 years, my name will not be known to many of you. I must then introduce myself. I was the first person to be consecrated by the late Archbishop Matthew, and my consecration took place in the Old Meeting House, Birmingham, on June 8, 1910. You will see from the chart on the outer side that this makes me the senior Old Catholic bishop in the United Kingdom. I am appalled and bewildered by the vast number of bishops of the Matthew line now existing. The majority of them are making no effort whatever to carry on the genuine and original Old Catholic body, and all in schism one from another. As there is no central authority in which all are subject, my seniority of consecration entitles me to the headship of British Old Catholicism, and I am here to claim my rights. All bishops, priests, and other clergy in Old Catholic orders are reminded of their duty of canonical obedience and must submit themselves to my jurisdiction. The laity also must fall into line. I do not want to make anyone's position difficult, and although I know that many consecrations have been contrary to the canons, I am willing to recognize all bishops whose names appear on the chart, and all claiming orders by them, and waive all enquiries as to the circumstances of their consecration or ordination, as their subject to my lawful authority will regularize their status. I have consecrated one bishop, Ernest Odell Cope, and this was to revive Father Ignatius's Lanthony Foundation, and he is in communion with me. It is true that I am an old man, and that the task before me is hard, but I will persevere to the end, and I am able to heal some of the wounds in the Old Catholic body. I shall be satisfied, and will hand on my torch to a younger successor, who will be better able to finish the work. Yours in his service, Ralph Whitman, Old Catholic Bishop, Gloucester. Advent Sunday, 1940. The recipients of this leaflet were utterly mystified, for none of them, not even the Archbishop of Caerglow, who lived within 5 miles of Gloucester, had even heard of this Bishop Ralph Whitman. No evidence of the consecration of a person named Whitman has ever been found among the documents of the first legionary Old Catholic bishop in England. Whitman's consecration was denied by all the other Matthew bishops who were alive in 1940. His name does not appear in either of Matthew's registers, which have been preserved. Lastly, there is no certainty that such a person as Ralph Whitman actually existed. On the other hand, we have Cope's testimony, for what it is worth, written on August 21st, 1945. This letter, whose phraseology reveals a lack of education, reads as follows. Ralph Whitman is described as a Congregationalist minister, trained for the Wesleyan ministry, went to Canada and worked on Canadian Pacific Railway, returned to England, was ordained and then consecrated by Archbishop Matthews, Sikh, returned to Canada and set up a small community of men, failed, helped in Canadian church, returned home before last war, did war work for Church Army Hut near Pop, lived at Gloucester for some years, and now too old, his relations have placed him in some home. The document I sent you he personally made out himself, and was conveyed to me mysteriously, it having been posted to me during one of the blitzes from Paddington, and bearing all the marks of rough usage. The wax seal was smashed, and the soiled appearance was very suggestive of being handled grimly. It was accompanied by a soiled card with a regimental crest upon it of the Burma Command, and written upon it was, I found this amongst my uncle's papers. I believe they belong to you, I.W. There was no address, and I cannot trace anyone who sent it to me. It was evidently intended for me, and evidently made out since my consecration 1940. So Cope's consecration and consecrator remained one more unsolved mystery of the byways of English church history. Ernest Odell Cope was born in 1883 and spent the greater part of his life at Burton-on-Trent. As a youth he was greatly attracted by Father Ignatius of Lanthony, and shortly after the latter's death on October 16, 1908, he became a novice in the community, now reduced to 4 monks, with 2 nuns and 7 extern sisters. In the autumn of 1909, Cope was one of the 3 brethren who accompanied the superior, Father Asaph Harris, to Caldy Island, where they were allowed by Abbot Allred Carlisle to test their vocations to his form of Anglican Benedictine life as simply laymen. A fortnight was enough for him. Cope went home to Burton-on-Trent, where he was employed in one of the larger breweries. Soon after this he married, and a son was born. Having served in the army during the First World War, his evangelistic zeal found an outlet in the Stapenhill district of Burton, first in a small room over a garage, and then in the little wooden church dedicated to St. John, which had been erected by Mar Jacobus, Bishop of Mercia in Middlesex, and a Midland outpost of his evangelical Catholic communion. Ernest Cope and his companion, Henry Cotton, were both laymen, but they were authorized by Bishop Hereford to conduct morning and evening services, for which they used the Book of Common Prayer. At intervals, Dr. Oakton, one of Hereford's priests, came from Glasgow to celebrate the Eucharist and to renew the reserved sacrament. He generally used Hereford's vernacular version of the Liturgy of St. Serapion. In 1936, Cope had a disagreement with Hereford, and the following year he resigned from the Evangelical Catholic Communion. By January 1939, his imagination was at work on a plan to revive what he called the Lanthony Abbey tradition, but the outbreak of Second World War prevented anything being done until the summer of 1940, when, according to his own statement, he was secretly raised to the episcopate in a private chapel at Repton, Derbyshire, on July 19th. He did not reveal this even to his closest friends until June 1945. Even then, he persistently refused to divulge the name of his consecrator. Cope merely hinted that his consecrator had been assisted by 2 ex-colonial Anglican bishops whose names must not be divulged until he had permission to do so. There are indications that Cope embellished the first account of this mysterious function, suggesting that he realized the necessity of justifying an incredible story. There was also a tale that his previous ordination to the priesthood had taken place on the lawn of the house where Whitman was staying at the time, but he never mentioned when or where he was raised to the diaconate. What is suspicious about the whole business is that the writing of the alleged instrument of consecration bears a strong resemblance to Cope's own handwriting, especially the signature of Ralph Whitman. It is quite possible that Cope's fertile brain concocted the whole business in satisfaction of his intense desire to be at the head of a new religious movement. He may even have concocted or got somebody else to write the circular letter signed Ralph Whitman, Old Catholic Bishop. The Reverend Alban Cockram, who knew Cope intimately, writes, "I still believe that Cope was no rogue, but an earnest and simple enthusiast with a fertile imagination and little education. The wording and spelling of the documents are very like Cope, and the practice of appending the cross after the signature is characteristic of him. The peculiar phraseology is characteristic of Cope, who is entirely prayer book and outlook and practice. Yet that strange meeting of Cope and Whitman in the church army hut at Popering, Flanders, just before the armistice in 1918, mentioned in one of his letters, set going a whole train of events, and the whole affair sounds so circumstantial that it leaves a vague sort of feeling that it might be true." Here is an example of Cope's peculiar phraseology, a letter from him dated August 7, 1945, explaining the reasons for his secret consecration. "After the years of lying in abeyance and the dispersal of the monks of Lantany, we do regret the persecution which the late Father Ignatius suffered at the hands of his own churchmen, and the absence of ministerial necessities denied by the church of his baptism. We do agree that this consecration shall give a stand apostolically to create and supply the spiritual ministrations forever, and at the present moment we desire that the name of the consecrator shall be held secret until such times we gather it is a seasonable moment to disclose our action made this day." Just what is meant by this rigmarole, with its invariable use of a capital letter at each reference to himself or Father Ignatius, is not clear. No matter, on August 2, 1942, Cope found reasons for raising to the episcopate, in the utmost secrecy, James York Batley, originally one of Bishop Hereford's priests, and who acted as his vicar general for a time. The Bishop of the Order of Lantany Brothers, a community which as yet existed only in his imagination, had certainly inherited Father Ignatius's indifference to ecclesiastical jurisdiction. Nothing mattered so long as it was for Jesus only, the Lantany war cry or slogan. On June 18, 1944, Cope performed another secret consecration when he laid his hands on John Sire, giving him the title of Bishop of Lantany. Why 3 bishops should have been thought necessary for a non-existent flock is difficult to grasp. Neither is it easy to find reasons for Sire's consecration of Frank Ernest Langhelt as Bishop of Minster on July 23, 1944. The Episcopal brewery worker at Burton-on-Trent was absolutely convinced that he must found a community of some sort in the Vale of Ewyas, as close as possible to Lantany, but as he had a wife and family to support, he could hardly desert them to become the actual founder of the brotherhood. Then one day he came across a man who showed what Father Ignatius would have held to be clear signs of a monastic vocation, and who appeared to be eager to dedicate his life, in the words of the Lantany motto, to Jesus only. This was a certain William Albert Cork, who had received the 4 minor orders from Mar Georges on November 18, 1947, but who had lost no time in persuading Mar Doreos, Bishop of Caerleon of the Jesuin or Free Orthodox Catholic Church, to raise him to the priesthood. Cope, always easy-going, had no scruples about promoting Cork to abbatial status, and never bothered about any sort of novitiate. Not satisfied with this, he consecrated him as bishop on January 1, 1948. The ceremony took place in a room at St. David's, a bungalow at Chapelle-Uffin, just below Lantany Abbey, which belonged to 2 nieces of Father Ignatius, Hilda and Irene Ewens. These kind-hearted spinsters, who managed to combine Anglo-Catholic principles with membership of the Salvation Army, offered a use of their retreat to the embryo community until a real abbey could be built, or until Eric Gill's widow be prepared to sell Ignatius's monastery to the new order. Hopeful of attracting vocations, a prospectus was printed by the Order of Lantany Brothers containing the information that the presiding bishop was the Right Reverend E. O. Cope, known as Ignatius OSB. Other dignitaries were the assistant bishop, the Right Reverend J. Y. Batley, the bishop abbot, the Right Reverend William Cork OSB, and the prior, the Very Reverend Charles Hassler OSB. The public were informed that the objects of the new order were 1. To re-establish the monastic vocation with the spirit of the former Lanthony Abbey, a community of men under the late Abbot Ignatius OSB. 2. To provide possibilities of study, prayer, and evangelistic priests and ordinands to the mystery of the Church of Jesus Christ, with the Anglical, Sikh, and Catholic system. There would be a simple rule of life and no great austerities. The brothers would wear a picturesque costume consisting of a black sermon Sikh cassock, a hooded scapular, and a blue girdle. All Christian young men were given a cordial welcome, no matter to what denomination they belonged. Like his beloved Father Ignatius, the Right Reverend Bishop Cope, OSB, wanted to fraternize with Methodists, Baptists, Plymouth Brethren, Roman Catholics, the Salvation Army, in fact, any persons who could prove to him that they were saved. But in emulation of the Universal Patriarch Banks at East Molesey, the Lanthony brothers would give special preference to ex-servicemen. Not only had the presiding bishop, who lived with his wife at Burton-on-Trent, founded a new religious community, he had also created, at least on paper, a new religious denomination, which he called the Free Anglo-Catholic Church. He guaranteed that its orders were genuine British Old Catholic. The Right Reverend William Cork, OSB, only managed to rule over his little community in the Black Mountains for 3 months. In April 1948, he was bound over for 2 years at the Old Bailey, having pleaded guilty to solemnizing marriages at a place other than a church or licensed chapel, and to performing an irregular burial service. His elevation, which was due to have taken place during Pontifical High Mass in the bungalow at Chapelle aux Fins on September 26, had to be postponed indefinitely. Such was the end of the last attempt to revive monastic life at Lanthony, yet it perpetuated the Ignatian tradition, as is disclosed in his register, in which so many postulants and novices failed to persevere. Cork's next meant effort was to found a sect called the Orthodox Ecclesia. Since 1958, he has been leading an almost eremitical life, with none of the worries which would have faced him had he remained Lord Abbot of Lanthony. The Right Reverend Bishop Ignatius OSB, otherwise Ernest Odell Cope, must have been heartbroken that his well-meant effort to create and supply spiritual ministrations forever to the Order of Lanthony Brothers proved a failure. After the death of his wife, he lived with an adopted daughter at Burton-on-Trent, where he died on November 9, 1957. His episcopal adventure was not exactly a happy one. 8. Old Roman Catholic Church, English Rite. This posthumous offspring of the Matthew family came into the world on September 22, 1950, the feast of St. Thomas of Villanova, after Father Wilfrid Barrington Evans and 3 other priests had repudiated the authority of Monsignor Williams, Archbishop of Caerglow. Today, this handful of clergy and laity proclaim that their object is to preach the faith in an English manner, in opposition to the alien manner propagated by the new Roman Catholic Church. At the same time, however, they have insisted that of all the churches in the world, they are the nearest to Rome, and because of this, decline to enter into any sort of relations with any bodies calling themselves Old Catholic. The founder and his followers justified their schism by explaining in the first issue of Onward, January 1951, that this was felt to be the only way to preserve the movement and to make progress. The public were informed that this new church had been formally inaugurated 4 months previously, when a declaration was signed and a revised constitution adopted. Father Barrington Evans, being the senior priest, was appointed administrator. Under his jurisdiction were missions at West Drayton, Middlesex, Vauxhall, Southwest 11, Gillingham, Kent, Newton, Abbot, Devonshire, and Birmingham. Their reasons for breaking away from the prelate, whom they had hitherto regarded as the canonical successor of Monsignor Matthew, First Legionary Old Catholic Bishop for Great Britain and Ireland, were summed up as follows. It cannot be denied that in renouncing membership of the old Roman Catholic body to which they had formerly belonged, the first members of the Church have involved themselves in a schismatic act, but neither can it be denied that, had they not acted as they did, the old Roman Catholic movement in England most likely would have come to an early end, and it seemed better to them to continue the work at whatever cost, rather than to allow it to be extinguished. They were confident, therefore, that eventually the result of their work will outweigh the initial disadvantages of being separated from the mainstream of the movement, represented by Monsignor Mary Bernard Williams, and will more than justify the means taken. The tone of the editorial in the April 1951 issue of the official organ of the new church could not have been more hopeful of a glorious future, for it stated, "Among the letters received was one from Father Carlo Miglioli, who was ordained by Monsignor Matthew as long ago as 1915, and who with Monsignor B.M. Williams must be the only survivors of his clergy. Father Miglioli, now resident in Italy, not only sent us his greetings, but expressed great concern at the cleavage of the movement, and makes a suggestion towards ending it. Letters have reached us also from several other countries, notably from Holland, Austria, Germany, and Hungary. In 3 of these places we are now in friendly correspondence with the bishops presiding over autocephalous churches, and we are especially pleased to learn that in Holland, under the direction of Monsignor Tollenaar, Bishop of Arnhem, a church with very similar aims to ourselves has been set up. We have always deplored the lapse into heresy of the Church of Utrecht, and it is very consoling to know that a move is on foot to bring some, at least, of the people of the Netherlands back to the true faith and the one fold through the organization of a Uniate church. In Hungary, Archbishop Fehérváry of the Old Catholic Church has given a warm welcome to us, and friendly relations between the respective churches are fast being established. Where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. Perhaps it was a good thing that the newly appointed administrator of the schismatic branch of the old Roman Catholic Church in England had not taken the trouble to study the nature and origins of some of these autocephalous churches on the continent with which such friendly relations were being formed. For instance, Archbishop Fehérváry and his followers in Hungary were not only in schism from the old Catholic churches, but were associated with the extremely heretical Mariovites in Poland. Fehérváry himself had been raised to the episcopate by Prochowski and was one of Michael Kowalski's hierarchy, which included several female bishops. Again, it is somewhat doubtful if Monsignor Tollenaar was trying to bring back the Dutch Old Catholics into communion with the Holy See, granted that he had vague ecumenical visions. In his earlier days, he had been a priest of the liberal Catholic Church. Apparently, having rejected theosophy and broken away from this church of the Matthew succession, he formed a small sect of his own at Arnhem. About 1942, he got into touch with the Swiss Society of Deacons, Schweizerisch Diakonenverein, which had started a mission at Oppend in Friesland. 2 or 3 brothers were trying to link up Christians of all denominations, except Roman Catholics, and enroll them in the Lutheran Brotherhood of the Common Life at Ruschlikon in Switzerland, directed by Bishop Gotthilf Giraud, the ex-Trappist monk, who, as primate of the Église catholique Francaise, was trying to revive Gnosticism, and who had made a name for himself as an occultist and faith healer, being regarded as an authority on magic. On his return to Arnhem, Tollenaar assumed the title of Apostolic Vicar of the Netherlands, feeling that he was called to the episcopate, and unable to find any prelate on the continent to consecrate him. He decided that he might do worse than make use of Charles Saul, the ex-Mar Leofric, Archbishop of Sophronia, Catholicate of the West, now head of the English Episcopal Church. So this obliging bishop traveled from Acton to Arnhem, where on January 8, 1950, in the Kapelle van ons Lievroe, he laid hands on Tollenaar. Considering his otherwise militant Protestantism, it is surprising that he felt able to interpolate certain ceremonies from the Roman Rite into the 1662 prayer book form of consecrating a bishop. The new prelate gave himself the title of Old Roman Catholic Bishop of Arnhem. Neither he nor his few followers were recognized by the Church of Utrecht or by the liberal Catholic Church in the Netherlands. They were merely a little sect of Theosophical, Lutheran, French Gnostic, and English evangelical origins, with their bishop in the Protestant Chichemian line of succession. His pro-cathedral was an attic in his house, said to be rather stuffy, owing to a generous use of incense. It was reported that the congregation sometimes consisted of Mrs. Tolinar, but this may have been malicious gossip on the part of the genuine old Catholics in Arnhem. The clergy of the new dissident body, having elected Father Barrington Evans as their first bishop, had to find a prelate to consecrate him, and this was not easy, in spite of so many autocephalous continental churches now being in friendly relationship. An offer, however, came from Bishop Radovan Jost, one of the hierarchy of Marko Kalogjera's schismatic Old Catholic Church in Yugoslavia, founded in 1933. The bishop-elect may not have felt it worthwhile to investigate the antecedents of this liberal-minded prelate far away beyond the Adriatic, but having decided to accept his offer, arranged to make the long journey with his domestic chaplain. It was a bitter blow when, at the last moment, the Yugoslav embassy in London refused to give them visas. An SOS was dispatched to Holland, and Bishop Tolinar replied that he would be delighted to provide the schismatic Old Roman Catholics with a primate. He came to England, and on August 5, 1951, consecrated Father Barrington Evans as Ivor Bux. The new prelate, enriched with the Syrian Antiochean Armenian Uniat Order of Corporate Reunion, Old Catholic Syrian Malabar, Chaldean Uniat, Syro-Chaldean, Roman Catholic, Old Catholic Senior Line, Syrian Gallican, Anglican, Non-Juring, Irvingite, and other lines of apostolic succession, believed to have been obtained from Tolinar by way of Saul and Mar Georgius, Patriarch of Glastonbury and Prince Catholicos of the West, assumed the title of Bishop of Verulam and started to organize his followers. Monsignor Williams was horrified when the news reached him a few days later and wrote, "I have no idea who Tolinar may be, or anything of his claims to be a bishop, but if they were real and would stand inspection, I have no doubt that he should have been loudly informed of them." A few days later he wrote, "These bishops increase like plague germs, so that it is impossible to keep up sides with them. Some of them, hitherto unheard of by me, have quite privately written to me expressing sympathy and informing me of their refusal to act. From this I judge that the person who in the end did act must be someone of particularly poor standing. In the notice of the consecration issued by Mr. Evans, giving particulars of the times of the various functions, the name of the consecrator is not mentioned. I thought this rather significant. All that the Archbishop of Caerglo could do was to insist that the new schismatic body was renamed the Old Roman Catholic Church, English Rite. 5 months before his consecration, Barrington Evans had approached his former metropolitan, hoping that he would reconsider his attitude about closing down the pro-Uniat Rite, but in vain. After the latter's death in June 1952, the way was made clear to go ahead with the conversion of England to Old Roman Catholicism by means of vernacular liturgy.